The battlefield was silent now, but only because nothing was left alive to scream. Charred wreckage and twisted bodies lay strewn across the blasted landscape, steam rising from pools of blood soaking into alien soil. The only movement came from a squad of Turval shock troopers, their black and silver armor gleaming under the pale light of a dying sun. They marched through the wreckage, boots crunching against scorched bones, their elongated faces twisted in amusement. At the center of the devastation, a lone human sat slumped against a slab of shattered metal, one arm limp at his side, blood seeping from deep gashes across his body. Captain Jack Calloway, call sign Reaper, looked half dead. His right eye was swollen shut, his fatigues torn and stained with dirt and gore. The rifle at his feet was empty, the barrel scorched from overuse. A Turval officer, his armor etched with the sigils of a dozen conquests, strode forward, arms clasped behind his back. He tilted his head, examining Calloway as though inspecting a damaged machine. "Look at this," he said in his guttural, accented voice. The mighty human predator, reduced to a wounded animal. The others laughed, the sound grating and hollow. One reached out with a clawed hand and gripped Calloway's jaw, forcing his head up. "I thought humans were supposed to be dangerous." Calloway's good eye flickered open, blue sharp, assessing. He saw 10 of them. Elite troops, their weapons relaxed, their body language confident. They thought this was over. That was their first mistake. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. "You should see the other guys," he rasped. Another laugh rippled through the Turval squad. The officer turned to one of his men and gestured. "Strip him of his weapons. Bind his hands. High Command will want a prisoner to parade." 2 soldiers stepped forward. Calloway didn't resist. He let them wrench his arms behind him, their alien hands rough against his bruised skin. One of them removed the knife strapped to his belt, tossing it aside like garbage. The other kicked his rifle away. Then one of them noticed something. "This is strange," the soldier muttered, looking at his weapons display. His rifle, he fired over 1,000 rounds. The officer frowned. "That's impossible." "It should be," the soldier said. "But it's empty. Every single magazine, every grenade, even his knife is worn at the edges." They all hesitated. Looking around, they saw the full scale of the destruction, the way bodies were positioned, how the wreckage of alien vehicles was burned from inside out, how some of their own had been torn apart by hand. Realization crept in, but arrogance drowned it out. "Human desperation," the officer declared. "They fight like cornered beasts, without reason. It doesn't matter how many they kill. They always lose." Calloway smiled. "You keep telling yourselves that." A sharp blow to his stomach cut off any further words. A soldier shoved him forward, and he stumbled. They forced him into a graft carrier, the interior cold and sterile. Restraints clamped around his wrists and ankles. He didn't fight. Not yet. The carrier lurched forward, thrusters humming. Through a slit in the metal, Calloway caught glimpses of the battlefield shrinking behind them. Bodies. Smoke. Silence. He focused on his breathing, steady and controlled. Pain radiated from his ribs, likely cracked. His left shoulder was dislocated, but none of it mattered. They thought he was broken. They thought they'd captured a beaten man, but they didn't realize who they had. Jack Calloway wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even a warrior. He was something else entirely. The Baba Yaga of war. And this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Turval prison was a monolith of black metal, carved into the bedrock of a forgotten world. The air smelled of ozone and damp stone, the hum of energy fields resonating through the walls like the pulse of a living beast. It was built to hold the worst enemies of the Galactic Empire, rebels, warlords, assassins. No one escaped. No one tried. Jack Calloway sat in the dim light of his cell, wrists bound in reinforced restraints, feet chained to the floor. A single light flickered overhead, casting shifting shadows against the smooth, sterile walls. His body ached, bruises and half-healed wounds throbbing with every shallow breath. The Turval guards hadn't been gentle. Good. He preferred it that way. Pain sharpened the mind. 2 soldiers stood outside his cell, speaking in hushed tones, their elongated voices lilting with amusement. "The human is weaker than I expected," one said. "They call him Reaper." But he barely put up a fight. Calloway didn't react. He kept his breathing slow, his body slack. Let them think he was broken. A new set of footsteps approached, heavier, deliberate. The cell door hissed open, and a figure stepped inside. Commander Vast Taurin, Turval intelligence officer, tall and draped in ceremonial armor that gleamed with polished cruelty. His deep violet eyes studied Calloway like a scientist examining an insect. "Captain," he said, his voice almost pleasant, "you are far from home." Calloway met his gaze, silent. Vask stepped closer. "We know who you are, what you are. Your name alone has burned through our ranks like a sickness. Men whisper it before battle, as if speaking it aloud will bring you forth like some vengeful phantom." His lips curled. "But I look at you now, and I see only a man. Wounded, defeated." Calloway let the silence stretch. Let them think what they wanted. Vask studied him for another moment, then sighed. "You'll tell us what we need to know eventually." "They all do." He gestured, and the guards followed him out, the door sealing shut behind them. The moment the lock engaged, Calloway's posture changed. His muscles tensed, his heartbeat slowed, his mind sharpened. His captors had made a mistake. Underestimating him was one thing, but underestimating his team? That was fatal. 200 miles away, hidden beneath layers of rock and electromagnetic distortion, Sergeant Marcus Wolfe. Hayes adjusted the scope on his recon drone. His hazel eyes flicked between screens, watching guard patterns, heat signatures, and the fluctuating power grid of the prison. "He's inside. Cell block Delta 5, he murmured. "Vital signs stable. Bastard's probably meditating. He always was a stubborn son of a bitch." Corporal David Havoc, Wright muttered, double-checking his explosives. "Tell me we're getting him out of there soon. I'm itching to blow something up." Lieutenant Victor, Nomad Carter, knelt beside them, his sniper rifle resting against his knee. "We move fast, we move quiet. They don't know we're here yet, and I'd like to keep it that way." A low chuckle crackled over comms. Sergeant Gabriel Viper Ortiz, their tech specialist, was spliced into the Turval security grid from a stolen command terminal. "Quiet's overrated, amigo, but I've got control of their cameras, and I can loop the feeds when we're ready. Just give me the word." Hayes exhaled, steady and measured. "We go at 0300. We get Calloway, and we make sure they never forget what happens when you take an American prisoner." Inside his cell, Calloway listened to the subtle BZT of the security systems resetting. The lights dimmed for a fraction of a second, just enough. Ortiz was inside the network. Showtime. Calloway flexed his fingers, testing the restraints. The Turval believed in technology, but they lacked an understanding of the human body. They didn't know how a man like him could dislocate his own thumb, twist his wrist, and slide free of a binding meant for lesser men. A sharp breath, a tensing of muscles, and the shackles snapped loose. The first mistake had been capturing him. The second was thinking he'd stay put. The moment Calloway's wrist came free, his mind shifted into the familiar, honed clarity of a fight unfolding before it began. He flexed his fingers, rolling his shoulder despite the dull agony, still clinging to his battered frame. Pain meant nothing. Pain was a reminder that he was alive, and that meant the enemy wasn't. Not yet. Outside his cell, the guards remained oblivious. One leaned lazily against the wall, grip loose on his rifle. The other stared at a small data pad, likely monitoring prisoner vitals. Neither expected trouble. Their arrogance was the kind that came from never losing. That was about to change. Calloway moved with practiced efficiency. His hand snapped up, twisting the shackle chain still locked around his other wrist into a loop of reinforced alloy. With a controlled exhale, he burst forward. The first guard barely had time to register the motion before the chain lashed across his throat, yanking him backward. The second turned, eyes widening, but Calloway was already there. He drove a brutal elbow into the alien's windpipe, crushed his larynx, and caught the rifle before it hit the floor. No alarms, no wasted movement. He adjusted his grip, taking in the weapon's weight. It was bulkier than a human rifle, its power core humming beneath his fingertips. Good enough. He retrieved the fallen guard sidearm, then took his knife back from the belt of the other corpse. Through the small security window of his cell, Calloway caught sight of more movement. Three-man patrol, moving in formation. Too late. He fired once. The first Terval collapsed as a smoking hole opened in his forehead. The other two hesitated, long enough for Calloway to cross the distance, slam his shoulder into one, and drive his knife into the seam of his armor. The last tried to raise his rifle, but Calloway twisted the dying soldier's body into his line of fire. The panicked shot hit friendly flesh, and in that instant of horror, Calloway's stolen sidearm barked twice. The hallway fell silent. A flicker of static buzzed in his ear, then Ortiz's voice. "Nice of you to join the fight, Chief. Cameras are looped, but you've got about 5 minutes before they realize something's wrong." "Then we don't waste time," Calloway said, already moving. Halfway across the facility, Hayes, Carter, and Wright were a ghost force slipping through the cracks of Terval security. The enemy relied on scanners, automated drones, and interlock patrol grids, perfect against an enemy who played by the rules of conventional warfare. Against men like them, it meant nothing. Carter was the first to take a guard down, knife slipping between armor plates with surgical precision. The body was lowered, rifle caught before it could clatter. Hayes gestured ahead, counting positions and silent hand signals. 2 more guards on the balcony, one by the power junction. Wright grinned. "Watch this." The small explosive he lobbed wasn't meant for destruction, just chaos. It landed with a soft clink, then erupted in a crackling burst of white-hot light and sound. The guards reeled, stunned by the concussive blast. Carter fired once, twice. The balcony was clear before their targets even realized they were dead. They moved swiftly, each man an extension of the other, clearing paths with ruthless efficiency. Ortiz kept them ahead of security locks, doors opening and closing at his command. The moment they reached the prison's central core, Calloway's voice crackled in. "Make some noise." Hayes grinned. "Copy that, Cap." Wright set charges along the wall, small enough to punch through, but not collapse the facility. They didn't need rubble. They needed fear. The second the explosives detonated, alarms howled through the complex. And just like that, the hunted became the hunters. Calloway met them at the rendezvous, rifle raised. "Took you long enough." Carter smirked. "Didn't think you'd wait for us." "I don't get paid to do your job." Calloway clapped Hayes on the shoulder, then turned. "Where's our ride?" Ortiz's voice came over comms, urgent now. "Extraction's gonna be rough. They're scrambling heavy reinforcements. You've got 2 minutes before they lock down the perimeter." "Then we leave in 1. They moved as a single unit, covering angles, suppressing incoming fire as Terval soldiers poured into the corridors. Calloway dropped another guard, then another. His knife found flesh. His stolen rifle burned through enemy ranks. Wright left another gift behind, a charge along the support beams of the upper level. By the time the squad hit the outer corridor, their exit was blocked. A full platoon of Terval enforcers stood in formation, weapons primed. One of them stepped forward. "Vask, you truly think you can escape?" The commander's voice was steady, unwavering. "Even if you kill us, more will come. The Empire does not forget." Calloway leveled his rifle. Neither do we. A single sharp whistle from Hayes was all it took. Wright's final charge erupted, taking the ceiling with it. Reinforced steel collapsed in a cloud of dust and fire, swallowing the enemy in a storm of destruction. Through the smoke, their exit path was clear. The sky beyond was filled with the roar of an approaching dropship. Time to go. The dropship roared in low, engine screaming against the howling wind as it cut through the storm of fire and debris. Its hull bore the scars of past battles, a battered war machine built for extraction under hellish conditions. The side ramp was already lowering, and behind the controls, Chief Petty Officer Ray Ghost Mercer maneuvered with the steady hands of a man who had cheated death more times than he could count. "Get your asses on board now." His voice crackled over comms. "I can't hover forever." Calloway sprinted toward the open ramp, rifle snapping up to cover the retreat. His team moved in perfect sync beside him, bullets and plasma bolts shrieking through the air. Hayes laid down, suppressing fire. Carter took out a sniper trying to line up a shot, and Wright hurled one last explosive into the mass of Turval troops scrambling to regroup. The blast sent bodies flying, but Calloway knew more would come. A fresh squad of Turval shock troopers emerged from the dust, their armor reinforced, their weapons calibrated to tear through anything human-made. These weren't the undisciplined grunts they had cut down in the prison. These were elite enforcers, the best killers the Empire had. And they were pissed. "Go!" Calloway shouted as he turned, raising his rifle. He could feel the heat of the ship's thrusters at his back. But there was no time to think about escape. Not yet. The first Turval raised his plasma lance. Calloway shot him in the throat before the weapon even finished charging. He sidestepped the second, blade flashing as he drove his combat knife into the exposed joint of the alien's knee. Twisting hard, the Turval collapsed with a howl, but Calloway was already moving, already firing. Hayes was next up the ramp, dragging Wright with him as plasma fire burned the air around them. Carter threw his last mag into his rifle and laid down cover fire, dropping 2 more hostiles before vaulting onto the ship. Calloway turned to run, but something slammed into him hard. A plasma bolt seared across his ribs, spinning him sideways. His vision blurred, the pain bright and sharp. He hit the ground, breath torn from his lungs. Vask loomed over him, weapon aimed. "You should have stayed dead," the commander hissed. Calloway's fingers closed around his last blade. Vask pulled the trigger. Calloway twisted, rolling as the bolt burned past him. In the same motion, he slashed upward. The blade found flesh. Vask's weapon tumbled from his grasp as he staggered back, clutching his throat. No words. No last threats. Just the wet, gasping sound of a dying thing. Calloway didn't watch him fall. He was already pushing himself up, already sprinting. The ramp was pulling away, the dropship rising. "Come on, Cap!" Hayes shouted, reaching out. Calloway leapt. His hand caught the edge of the ramp. Carter grabbed his wrist, hauling him up just as the ship banked hard. The prison complex shrank beneath them, the landing pad swarming with enemy forces, weapons firing uselessly into the night. Inside the ship, Calloway collapsed against the bulkhead, breath ragged. Blood slicked his side, but it didn't matter. He was alive. Across from him, Hayes grinned. "Hell of a night, huh?" Calloway exhaled, shaking his head. "Just another day at the office." Wright chuckled, wiping soot from his face. "Think they'll come after us?" Carter checked his rifle, nodding toward the fading battlefield. "Not for a long time." Ortiz's voice came over comms, smug as ever. "Took down their command structure, fried half their security grid, and left a smoking crater where their best troops used to be. Pretty sure they'll be rethinking their life choices for a while." Calloway leaned back, closing his eyes for a brief moment. Then he grinned. "Next time," he muttered. We let them know who they're really dealing with from the start." Hayes smirked. "And ruin the surprise?" The team laughed. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly ahead,